Welcome back to CBS News. I'm Lana Zak, and we continue to monitor Iran's retaliatory strike towards Israel. U.S. officials say that the U.S. military has shot down some missiles that were headed towards Israel, and we continue to monitor. Speaking to our folks on the ground, the situation in Tel Aviv, Israel, where you can see fairly clear skies, not a lot of reports of sirens or activity there. We have heard from our Robert Berger, who is in Jerusalem, that they have seen something more similar to what you see in Bethlehem. That happened just moments ago. Those shooting stars as they appear in the sky, activity from the Iron Dome that's trying to take out those drones that were launched from Iran's territory. That is significant because it has never before happened, as we understand it, that Iran has directly attacked Israel. I want to bring in Charles Faint now for additional analysis. He is the chair for the study of special operations and deputy editorial director for the Modern War Institute at West Point. Thank you for being with us. So, first of all, what is your first reaction to these strikes? And when you see these images, tell us what you understand is happening.
Hey, Lana, thank you. Yeah, this is, as you mentioned, an unprecedented situation with the attack directly coming from Iran. In my experience, first reports on things like this are often highly erroneous. So I think it's smart for the world to wait until it dust settles a little bit to see not only what was targeted, but more importantly, what was struck. This was an interesting move by Iran. The flight time, 4 to 6 hours for these missiles and drones in some cases, gives a lot of time for those weapons to be intercepted. And that might have been Iran's intent and to have this huge show of force as a deterrent to future Israeli and U.S. military operations. However, if they were to time this attack with something massive from Hezbollah, who has, as we know, thousands of rockets, that could be a devastating and overwhelming situation for Israel with the Iron Dome and the other missile systems in the area. So it'll be interesting to see in the literal light of day and in the coming days what was targeted, what was struck, and what Israel's reaction will be.
Certainly want to talk to you more about Israel's potential reaction, but I want to follow up on something that you said about the potential for additional attacks from Hezbollah or another proxy for Iran. We received that statement from the Iranian mission to the United Nations saying that the matter is now concluded. Do you take them at their word on that?
So this was a course of action that a lot of security analysts predicted might happen. Iran had to, in their opinion, do some type of big response to this action by Israel. So by doing this and then saying it's over, basically taking their ball and going home, they're signaling that it could be a de-escalation. But as we often say in the military, the enemy has a vote, and Israel will also decide how to respond to this attack on their homeland. And that could take any number of forms. We could see assassinations inside Iran. We could see massive cyber attacks. We could see airstrikes. Certainly, all options are on the table for Israel. And a large part of that, Lana, will depend on how successful these Iranian strikes were against Israel.
And Charles, given the point that you were making initially, that they were already at the ready. The supreme leader of Iran had telegraphed that they were going to take retaliatory action, that what they chose to launch, at least from what we've seen so far, were some of these slower moving drones that took, as you said, between 4 and 6 hours to make it to Israeli airspace. And many of those were actually shot down en route to Israel, not only by the United States, but also by Jordan. What do you think a likely response from Israel could look like if the damage is not, in fact, severe?
So any number of things could happen. I think at a minimum, we would see some cyber attacks, something to deliberately and directly target the regime. I don't think that future strikes against the IRGC are off the table from Israel, especially with the most recent one that they did. The main individual that was targeted was admitted by Iran to be one of the chief planners of the October 7th attacks. So those things will continue. What we'll also see is things that we've already seen from Iran, the seizing of a merchant vessel in international waters today that was affiliated with a wealthy Israeli. And that's a further signal of their ability to impact world markets. So it'll be interesting to see what develops between these two nations, Lana.
Yeah, that action taken in the Strait of Hormuz earlier today. Um, all of that sort of leads me to wonder, Charles, how Israel's response differs from these other groups, like the group responsible for taking that shipping vessel, Hezbollah, which we know has been very active on the West Bank, or other Iranian proxies versus Iran. And given the significance of these weapons being launched from inside Iranian territory, how does that change the calculation?
So you brought up a good point, Lana, with all the different proxy organizations. You got the Houthis down in the south. Hamas is kind of on its back foot right now. You've got Hezbollah up in the north, but you might also have some action in the West Bank, which could also be very concerning to the Israelis. So I read a report earlier today about some severe tensions that arose after an Israeli teenager was murdered
Right.
in the West Bank. So what we could see, probably the worst case course of action on Israel's perspective, is this massive strike on Iran wasn't just one wave, if it's several waves tied with massive attacks from Hezbollah and an uprising of some type in the West Bank, that could be very bad for Israel and the region. And going back to your question about the response, what the response might be in something like that, which is nearly existential threat for Israel, certainly everything would be on the table, some type of massive response, most likely by air and by missile strike, because Israel has missiles as well directed at important targets inside Iran.
Charles, in the weeks leading up to this, there was international calls for a ceasefire. There were criticisms of the massive number of casualties in Gaza. One of the biggest headlines was about those aid workers that were killed by the IDF. Now the conversation is about an attack from Iran. We have seen so many of the same people and organizations and countries that were urging Israel to change action, now saying we stand entirely with Israel. Is this potentially a strategic mistake on the part of Iran?
I think that remains to be seen. It's an excellent question. So I think in Iran's calculus, this is something that they had to do. This is their backs up against the wall. They've been attack against their embassy, killing one of their major leaders in the IRGC. So I think Iran sees this in their interests, and it'll be interesting to see what happens afterwards. So you mentioned the aid workers that were killed in that unfortunate incident inside Gaza. I think that what we're looking for right now, Lana, is for all of these major players, countries around the world, non-state actors, non-government organizations, to really prevail upon both sides to keep this from getting into something bigger.
And on that front, we have known that these attacks were coming ever since April 1st, and Iran blaming Israel for those military leaders that were killed in Damascus. What is the significance, explain for our viewers, of Iran not making these attacks more of a surprise? We knew that retaliation was happening, and we knew when it was likely to happen.
Yeah, we also knew, based on past experiences, that something like this is likely, like a show of force. So when the American forces killed Soleimani, who was also a big leader in the IRGC, was thorn in our side in Iraq and elsewhere around the world, after he was killed by the U.S., Iran shot a bunch of missiles at U.S. forces inside Iraq. Some troops were unfortunately wounded, but no one was killed, and there was no further escalation. So Iran thought that they saved face. They carried out a mission against the United States in response to that, and then the issue was largely over. So there might be something to be said about that as a pattern for what's happening now with Israel.
All right, Charles Faint, thank you.